In this lesson, I'm going to show you how to configure the Raspberry Pi on the first boot with the desktop. So either you have followed the previous instructions by connecting the Raspberry Pi to a Wi-Fi network, setting up SSH and setting up VNC. Okay, or you may have just plugged a monitor to the Raspberry Pi with an HDMI cable. In that case, you will also arrive to that screen on your new monitor. So instructions are the same for both configurations. So first, okay, you may have that warning. SSH is enabled and the default password for the Pi user has not been changed. So you will only get that, of course, if you have previously set SSH like we did. Just click on OK, it doesn't matter. And you have the welcome screen to set everything up. So I'm just going to guide you through the different steps here. Click on next. So you choose your country, and for example, for me, it is France. Okay, choose language. I'm going to use the English language, so you can just also set your keyboard or anything that is related to your country. Okay, next. Okay, and here they will ask you to enter a new password. So we could have done that before, but because we have this option to do that here, I didn't do it before, so we can just change the password now. So simply choose a password that you want, and that will become the new password for the Pi user. Okay, so your user is still named Pi, okay, but then the password will not be Raspberry anymore. The password will be the password that you set here. Okay, so make sure that you remember the password after you set it here. Then you click on next. If the screen shows a black border around the desktop, you can click on that. For me, in my situation, I don't have the black border, so I'm just going to click on next. And then they will search for wireless network. So if it is the first time you boot your Raspberry Pi with an external monitor, of course here you have to choose which network you want to connect to and set up provide the password. Here I'm not going to do that because I'm already connected to that network, because that's what we previously did in another step. So I'm going to click on skip here, but you can click on next if you're not connected. And update software, you can click on next. Okay, it will check for updates. So after fetching the new available update, it will download the new packages, so it can install the packages. It may take some time here depending on your internet connection speed. And after all the updates have been downloaded, now the Raspberry Pi will install those updates. So here again, you have to wait a few minutes. Okay, and finally, you will get this message: system is up to date. So you click on OK, and now the setup is complete. So you can actually press restart. And as you can see, when I press restart here, because I'm using VNC, I get a message attempting to reconnect to VNC server. Okay, because of course the Raspberry Pi now is shutting down, so the VNC client can't connect to the VNC server. So what you can do here, you just need to wait. Okay, if the Raspberry Pi is disconnected, the VNC client will continue to try to connect to the Raspberry Pi, and when the Raspberry Pi will boot again, it will enable the VNC server and the client will be able to connect. And here, as you can see, we have a message: either the username was not recognized or the password was incorrect. And you get this in the first time because the password, actually you have changed the password. Okay, the password is not Raspberry anymore, the password is the new password that you have set. So you click on OK, and you can now double click on the VNC client again, and you can put your new password. Okay, and there you can actually click on remember password. Click on OK, and it will connect again as the user Pi. Okay, so now if I click here, I close it, I can connect again and it will not ask for the password. Great, and just one or two more things I want to show you. First, you can go here and click, you can just browse here and check what's inside, what are the different programs. And if you go to here, preferences and Raspberry Pi configuration, and if you go to interfaces, okay, that is basically the same thing that we did with the Raspberry config, okay, when we entered the Raspberry Pi with SSH, and that is where, for example, you can enable SSH, okay, so here we have already enabled it. That is where you can enable VNC here. So if you are using an external monitor, it would be like this, so you just have to click on enable, okay, and then restart, and then you can use VNC, and we are going to actually see more of the different interfaces here during this course, but I'm going to leave it like that for now. And one thing that you may experience is, okay, if I try to put full screen, as you can see, it doesn't really work, okay? It's not good. As you can see, the resolution is not really updated correctly, okay? It's either too big or not fitting the screen. So to fix that, simply follow what I'm doing here. You can click here to open a terminal, okay? And that may look familiar to you before if you've used SSH, like in the previous steps. So when we used SSH, we were opening a new terminal inside the Raspberry Pi. And here we are simply doing the same thing, but instead of connecting to the Raspberry Pi from Windows or whatever, we are simply opening a new terminal directly inside the Raspberry Pi, which is the same thing. Okay, so you can use the command sudo and then nano, okay, nano, which is a text editor, and then /boot /config.txt. Okay, so you can just type this exact command and this will open the file named config.txt, which is located in the /boot. So slash is the root of the file system. So this is where the file is located. Okay, and what you can do is use the arrows from the keyboard to navigate in the file. So you can use the down arrow to go down until the end of the file. Okay, at the end of the file you will see that line dt overlay vc4 etc etc. What you can do is add a hashtag before, so this will simply comment the line. Okay, and you can press Ctrl S. Okay, you will see that message here. Ctrl S will save the file, and then Ctrl X will exit the file. So now that we have changed that, as you can see, it's in boot directory, so you can guess that it will apply on boot. So you can now reboot your Raspberry Pi. So you have two choices now. You can do sudo reboot like we did before with SSH, and you can also go here and click on logout and shut down, just like you would shut down any computer. Okay, so if you want to actually reboot the Raspberry Pi, you have to click on reboot. Here I have clicked on shutdown. So what it will do is simply shut down the Raspberry Pi. And so you have to wait a few seconds. Let's say that when you shut down the Raspberry Pi like this, wait something like 10 to 20 seconds. After that, what you do is you take off the power cable from the Raspberry Pi, okay, and then you put the power cable back in the Raspberry Pi so it will boot again, okay? For now, this is the only solution you have to boot a Raspberry Pi, is when it's shut down, is you take off the power cable and you put it back inside. So the Pi is now rebooting. You can wait again a few seconds or maybe up to 1 minute. Okay, and now the VNC client has connected again to the Raspberry Pi, and now it's much better, okay? So you can go here and click on enter full screen mode, okay, and now you have your Raspberry Pi full screen with the same resolution as your monitor, and you can click here to exit full screen, okay? So Great, you have set up everything, and now you are ready to go to the next step, which is to start some programming with Python on your Raspberry Pi. So at this point, the important thing is that the configuration is working. If you don't understand all the steps, especially the command line tools we have used or the different options, that is really not a problem here, because we are going to come back to that a little bit later, because this is kind of more advanced. Okay, I'm making the course very easy at the beginning and going step by step to the more advanced stuff. What I encourage you to do before we actually go to the next session is just play around and see what's inside. You can open a web browser, you can just check the different options. Okay, be curious about what's in there, and I will see you in the next section. And one last very important thing is actually when you want to shut down and power off the Raspberry Pi, don't just take off the power cable when it's running. Okay, you just don't unplug your computer when it's running. Okay, first what you do is you go here, you shut down your computer, and then when it's completely shut down, you can remove the power cable. Okay, so if you don't do that, you may corrupt the SD card, and when you boot again, you might have an error, and in that case, you would have to completely reinstall your Raspberry Pi.